How's it going, everybody? Too Spooky here. So back when I first hit 250 subscribers, I made my very first top 10, which was the top 10 Bankai in Bleach. However, since it was my very first top 10, I had a lot of things to learn about making a top 10, at least with the format I use. I would just like to start out by saying that my previous Bankai list was not very good at all. I received a lot of support from that video, and a lot of my early subscribers came from it. However, I also received a lot of criticism, and that's because the list was bad. And your guys' criticism really helped show me the error of my ways, and how to make my future top 10s better. And I cannot thank you enough for that. And I promise you, this list I've made for you today will not only redeem my previous failure of a list, but it will knock your socks off. 100% guaranteed, your socks will be knocked off your feet. Ever since I made that first top 10 Bankai video, I've been telling myself that as soon as Bleach is over and all the Bankai are revealed, well, at least the ones that get revealed, but I told myself I would make a new and updated list after Bleach ended. Well, as it turns out, Bleach ended much sooner than I'm sure most of us originally thought it would, and because of that, I've created a new list. A better list, and a list that I think you guys will at least somewhat agree with. Just remember to keep in mind that a lot of things are factored into these, and through my analysis, my personal opinion reigns supreme. However, I can safely say that this list will not be littered with favoritism like my last one. Anyway, enough of my rambling. Let's start the list. Today, we're going to be counting down the top 10 Bankai in Bleach. Now, before we get into the list itself, there's a few things you should know. The first is that my pronunciation is absolute trash, so I'm more than likely going to mispronounce some names and phrases throughout the video. The second thing is that this list is not based specifically on strength or power, although strength does have a little bit to do with some of them. However, we are also looking at the overall ability or abilities of the Bankai in question, how unique it is, and how useful it is or can be overall. The third and final thing is that since this is a top 10, I could only pick 10 out of all the Bankai in the series. So a lot of people you may expect to see on this list might just not be there. Anyways, let's begin, shall we? First, I'd like to start out with an honorable mention, which is Ichigo's new Bankai. Or should I say his true Bankai, Tensa Zangetsu. The reason this is just a mention and not on the actual list is because we don't know what his new Bankai can do. We were just simply never shown. However, we can assume this Bankai is at least relatively powerful because Yuha recognized that it posed a threat, so he destroyed it instantly. So if he deemed it powerful enough to oppose him, we can only assume that Ichigo's true Bankai is a force to be reckoned with. But because we simply don't know what its abilities are, or what it can even do for that matter, Ichigo's Bankai will not be on this list. Number 10. Rukia's Bankai, Haka no Tagame. Rukia's Bankai increases the distance and the area of Rukia's ability to reach the temperature of absolute zero. When it is released, a pillar of cold mist rises up into the air from where Rukia is standing and covers a very wide area in her vicinity. Anything within the area of influence of this mist is then frozen. After the victim or victims are frozen solid, the victims will crumble away within seconds. In addition to this, physical contact with Rukia herself causes other people to begin freezing solid because of how cold she is. Also, she gets this sick outfit. However, with such a powerful ability also comes a few risks and weaknesses. For instance, after she begins raising her body temperature back to normal from absolute zero, she has to do so very slowly or she risks harming her own body. Because of this, her Bankai is also on a time limit because prolonged use could also damage herself or anyone else in her vicinity. And her final weakness is how difficult this beastly Bankai is to control, because with all that power she needs to be very careful with how she uses it, because the slightest mistake could end up killing her in the process. Now right off the bat, a few of you are probably thinking I'm insane for putting Rukia on this list, especially when you see who didn't make the list later on. But you'll of course have to hear me out. Now at first glance, Rukia's Bankai seems very powerful, but there's just too many weaknesses to put it very high on this list. On top of that, Rukia lacks the experience to control it. However, after the 10-year time skip at the end of Bleach, Rukia becomes a captain! Now, Rukia can't just become a captain with a Bankai as dangerous as hers, so what I'm getting out of this is that Rukia must have trained like crazy over the course of that 10-year period to master her Bankai, or at the very least learn how to control it and overcome her weaknesses. Otherwise, she could never reach the rank of captain. Of course, we don't know for sure, but the biggest downfall of this Bankai is the weaknesses, and if you can overcome those, this Bankai would be unstoppable. See, I can't really think of anyone who would be able to survive Absolute Zero other than a small handful of overpowered Bleach characters. For those of you who don't know, Absolute Zero is negative 273.15 degrees Celsius or negative 459.67 degrees Fahrenheit. That is fucking cold. Anything that comes into contact with a temperature that cold would freeze instantly, and after they're frozen they would simply just crumble away. So Rukia can basically one-shot almost anyone. However, there are two instances where I can still see her Bankai being ineffective, which is why I can't place her any higher on this list. The first is extreme heat, specifically the release of former Captain Yamamoto's shikai or Bankai. See, in Toshiro's case, his Bankai melts after Yamamoto releases his shikai or Bankai, and while they are still active, Toshiro's Bankai is useless. We'll get to Toshiro later, of course, spoiler alert, but I imagine if Yamamoto's Zanpakuto release is enough to render Toshiro useless, the same could probably happen to Rukia. I imagine that while his Zanpakuto is released, Rukia wouldn't be able to use her Bankai whatsoever. I imagine the mist she creates would merely not activate or just melt upon activation, also rendering her Bankai useless as well. However, this is just speculation and we will probably never know for sure. The second thing is about her area of influence. See, if her opponent could simply leave this area or escape it, they wouldn't be frozen. And while Rukia is slowly raising her body temperature back to normal, they could simply return and attack while she is defenseless. All they would need to do is be far enough away or be fast enough to escape, either by a super fast flash step or some sort of teleportation technique. In general, Rukia's Bankai is extremely powerful, but to me there are just too many weaknesses and ways around it. And on top of that, there are just so many other Bankai on this list that are simply better, stronger, and more useful. But still, her Bankai was by no means a bad one, and it is good enough to make this list in the first place. So because of that, Rukia starts us off at number 10. Number 9. Toshiro's Bankai, Daigarin Hyorin Maru. Toshiro's Bankai allows him to freeze specific objects and areas, and the radius and strength of that freezing power is greater than that of his shikai. Because the Bankai's freezing ability is much greater, Toshiro can also swing his tail around as a weapon to attempt to freeze objects. If Toshiro stabs someone with his Zanpakuto, they will instantly be frozen from the ice that appears from the point of contact, which Toshiro can then break, shattering the frozen enemy inside along with the ice. This Bankai also grants Toshiro a plethora of interesting techniques, such as indefinite regeneration. See, as long as there is water in the air, his Bankai will continue to regenerate if it is broken or damaged in any way. He can create basically an ice clone of himself, except this clone is so lifelike that it passes off as an exact replica as himself. Toshiro generally uses this technique to trick his enemies, although it usually only works once. He can use the wings from his Bankai as a shield to protect himself from attacks. He can create many ice pillars, which will encircle him and his victim. When he chooses, these pillars will move toward the enemy, trapping and crushing them. Although this technique is very powerful, it takes quite a bit of time to prepare, and because of that, some sort of distraction is usually needed for a successful attack, such as that ice clone. He can create ice daggers out of water and use them as projectiles, and he can open up a huge hole in the clouds through which a ton of snow floats down onto his victim. When the snow comes into contact with the opponent, ice flowers appear all over their body, instantly trapping them in a pillar of ice. Toshiro says that when the last of the 100 petals fall, the life of the one it touched will be over. But that is actually not all this Bankai has to offer. In fact, Toshiro found a way to use his Bankai's full potential by aging himself. So while using his Bankai's complete form, he can flash freeze extremely big objects from a distance with a mere simple hand gesture. This also applies to objects that his sword cuts. Also, anything that he freezes will have all of its functions and abilities negated, and if anyone touches Hitsugaya while he is in this form, they will be flash frozen as well, so don't you dare lay a hand on him. And his final ability with this complete form is he can freeze all the matter in front of him after 4 seconds of building up his power, including energy like a Quincy arrow. So the main reason Toshiro is number 9 on this list is because to me, his sword is the superior ice-based Zanpakuto, which in turn leads to the superior ice-based Bankai. See, Rukia's Bankai is very powerful like we just stated, but her Bankai really only has one ability, at least from what we've seen, which is instant freezing. Well, Toshiro's Bankai can also flash freeze, although probably not at the same temperature and he has to wait 4 seconds, while Rukia can do it instantly. But even still, Toshiro has the same exact ability, which if we were looking at the flash freezing ability by itself, Rukia would reign supreme. But unfortunately for her, Toshiro's Bankai is also capable of so much more than just flash freezing. I won't go over all of them again, but for instance, he can use this ice as a realistic body double for deception purposes, which he could easily use as a distraction to land his ice pillars attack. He could also create ice projectiles for the fun of it, and use his wings as a defense. But the coolest ability to me has to be the snow from the sky. It's just such a unique technique, and although most opponents could simply run away from the snow before it touches them, I imagine the majority of people aren't going to think snow is a threat, and just ignore it until it hits them and it's too late. And if for some reason his Bankai is damaged, it can simply regenerate itself. The possibilities are seemingly endless. And that's the main reason why I believe his Bankai is superior to Rukia's. He can perform essentially the same ability as her, but on top of that, his Bankai is just so versatile and has so many other abilities on top of that one. Although his Bankai is not as strong as many of the others, it is much more tactical and useful for a majority of situations. However, even taking all that into mind, I still can't place him any higher on this list, because of the fact that his Bankai does have a huge weakness, which is extreme heat, specifically Yamamoto's Shikai and Bankai like we stated earlier. When it is activated, Toshiro's Bankai will simply melt and cease to function, leading to a devastating weakness, and on top of that I feel like this Bankai simply can't compete with some of the other Bankai on this list in terms of strength, usefulness, lack of weakness, and just everything else these other Bankai have to offer. But you guys will see what I mean soon enough. But because of all this Bankai is capable of, because it is superior to another on this list, and because of its weakness, this Bankai comes in at number 9. Number 8. Mayuri's Bankai. Konjiki Ashisogi Jizo. This Bankai produces an enormous creature that breathes a poisonous derivative of Mayuri's own blood, which is extremely lethal, and deadly to anyone who breathes it in, although even if the opponent does not breathe, the poison will still enter their body. Mayuri and Nemu are also immune to this poison. The poison spreads 200 meters around the Bankai itself, and it is almost impossible to avoid. The poison is so powerful that it will cause someone's body to start breaking down immediately after it is introduced. Mayuri can also change the composition of the poison as well, which makes it so no antidote can be made ahead of time and no immunity is developed against it. It can also produce many different blades that extend from its chest, allowing it to run through and skewer its opponents. And after skewering its poor victim, it can also devour them whole, in turn killing them of course if the blades and the poison didn't already. Mayuri has also modified his Bankai so that it will return to its sealed state if it ever attacks him. On top of all of this, the most deadly aspect of his Bankai is Mayuri's ability to modify it to his liking. For instance, by sending different data to this modified version, it can modify itself to counter different abilities of its opponents, essentially continually evolving to the situation at hand. This Bankai's one weakness is the fact that the poison can be repelled with a great amount of Reiatsu. So to me, this Bankai has a lot of potential that we simply haven't seen. For instance, the Bankai itself is huge, and I believe that it more than likely has many more uses for attacking its opponent. Like for instance, the thing could just run over and jump on top of its opponent, flattening them in the process. On top of that, the abilities it already has are something you don't want to mess with. The poison it produces will affect you regardless of whether or not you breathe it in, and if you can repel it with Reiatsu, you're still in trouble because that thing will be running at you with swords sticking out of its fucking neck, ready to turn you into mincemeat in seconds. And the biggest reason this Bankai is unstoppable is because of Mayuri's ability to modify it to his needs for any situation. For instance, say Toshiro over here is giving Mayuri a hard time. He could probably find some way to modify his Bankai to breathe fire, or at the very least turn up its internal temperature so his freezing abilities have no effect on it. And because of that, the possibilities are simply endless. However, this can also be a huge downfall if Mayuri doesn't know everything about his opponent and ends up sending false information or leaving important information out completely. It could in turn modify his Bankai in a bad way, giving his opponent the edge. Because so much preparation is needed to modify his Bankai, I simply can't put him any higher on the list. And if his modifications weren't even a thing, his Bankai would either be much lower or not on this list at all. But however, even with the modifications, a deadly poison is still something that's hard to counter, although that also has a weakness, which is Reiatsu. Bottom line, Mayuri's Bankai has endless possibilities, but these possibilities could also be the downfall of itself. And because of that, it runs in at number 8. Number 7. KENPACHI's Unnamed Bankai. KENPACHI's Bankai grants him unmatched physical strength and cutting power, and if that's not enough to put into perspective how strong it really is, he was able to rip off Gerard's arm in one single motion, and then cut him clean in half from a decent distance away. However, this Bankai does have one weakness, which is his own power. See, if it releases more power than his body can handle, his body will start breaking down under the pressure. So obviously we don't know a whole lot of details of what his Bankai is capable of, but it basically turns KENPACHI into the Bleach version of the fucking Hulk, but with a fucking meat cleaver. We've seen how strong KENPACHI is in the past, but it is without a doubt that this Bankai multiplies his power multiple times over. And on top of that, his cutting power is not limited to close combat because he is capable of decapitating enemies from a considerable distance away. However, this Bankai does have a weakness, which is its own massive overflow of power. I'm sure with time KENPACHI will learn to control and limit the amount given, but until then it remains a problem. However, this weakness is something that can be easily overlooked because I don't know about you guys, but I would much rather have my weakness be myself rather than my enemy, because that makes me unstoppable if I know my limits. The sheer physical power of this Bankai is without question unmatched, and honestly this is probably the strongest Bankai out of all of them when it comes to raw physical and cutting power. But that's all this Bankai has to offer. Other than that, it has no special abilities to aid it, making this Bankai only useful in certain aspects of combat. Say you need a whole army ripped and slashed apart, KENPACHI is your guy. But that's about as far as it goes, and because of that, KENPACHI slashes in at number 7. Number 6. SHUNSUI's Bankai. KATEN KYOKOTSU, KARAMATSU SHINJU. When this Bankai is released, it releases an aura that covers a large area around SHUNSUI. This area changes others' perception of the surrounding environment, making them perceive it as a darkened, bleak, and gloomy area, and causes others to feel varying levels of melancholy, sadness, and despair. His Bankai then goes through different phases or acts. The first act makes it so that any wounds SHUNSUI or his opponent inflict on each other's body will appear on their body as well, as if these injuries are shared between the two. The second act makes it so black spots appear all over the body of SHUNSUI's opponent, causing them to bleed profusely. The third act creates a massive amount of water that engulfs both SHUNSUI and his opponent. They both then remain within the water until one of them runs out of Reiatsu and drowns. And the final act is where SHUNSUI winds a white thread around his opponent's throat, multiple times before pulling it tight, leaving a deep cut in their throat that expands before blowing up their fucking head. I'm gonna say it right now, this is the most metal Bankai of them all, hands down. However, this Bankai does have one weakness, and that weakness is that this Bankai does not discriminate and will affect SHUNSUI's comrades if they are nearby. Because of that, he will only use it as a last resort if he is alone with the enemy. Now, this Bankai is insane. It makes them hurt themselves when they attack SHUNSUI, gives them some sort of fucking disease that makes them bleed all over their body, drowns them, and then blows up their fucking head. I don't know what else to say about it. If you get trapped in this Bankai, it's game over, man. Unless you're some sort of overpowered fuck. I really don't see any weaknesses or ways out of his Bankai. If you get trapped within, the only weakness that I can see is the part about drowning. See, they remain in the water until one of them runs out of Ryatsu and drowns, right? So I'm well aware that SHUNSUI has a massive amount of Ryatsu, but what if it just so happens that his opponent has more, and ends up outlasting SHUNSUI's? Would that mean that SHUNSUI would be the one that drowns, in turn killing himself at his own hands? I'm not sure, of course, and it's unlikely that that would ever happen, but if that is possible, it makes it not possible for me to rank his Bankai any higher. On top of that, like I stated, his Bankai does not discriminate, so it can only be used when allies are out of reach, making its use very circumstantial. And on top of that, some other Bankais are just simply more powerful than this one, making it lower than it could be. However, to me, the pros rule out the cons with this one, and I can't see most individuals being able to escape or survive this Bankai once they're trapped within. And because of that, this Bankai explodes in at number 6. Number 5. Byakuya's Bankai, Senbonzakura Kageyoshi. This Bankai has quite a few different forms and abilities, which are as follows. To begin, he drops his sword and it disappears into the ground, followed by 2 rows of 1,000 giant blades rising up from the ground. These swords then break apart and scatter, and countless flying blades pierce the enemy. No one knows the exact number of blades generated, and no one can dodge or even see the movements of these blades. The number of blades is great enough that Byakuya can simultaneously use them for offense and defense at the same time. And unlike his shikai, he can control all of these blades with his mind. His next form is called Senkei, which turns out to be his Bankai's true form. To try and simplify it, it requires his blood to activate, and it condenses all of his blades into 4 rows of over 1,000 swords, creating a circle that traps both Byakuya and his opponent inside. He can use all of these blades at once, or use them one by one, and even call them to his hands for melee combat. These blades are much stronger than his previous blades because they are more concentrated as well. He can also use his blades to perform Gokai, which is where he traps his enemy inside a twister of blades that slowly collapses in on the enemy, obliterating them. His final Bankai ability is Hakutiken. This ability condenses each and every one of his blades into a single, potent sword, drastically increasing its cutting power. He usually uses this as a last resort or a finishing blow, and each attack from this sword is so powerful that it creates many injuries from just one slash. This form also has wings, so Byakuya can use them to fly, which is also pretty damn cool. Now, although this Bankai is very powerful and has tons of abilities, it does have one weakness, which is the hurtless area, that the blades will not enter to protect himself, and if his opponent manages to enter the hurtless zone, Byakuya's Bankai can no longer affect them. However, Byakuya himself can decide the distance of this hurtless zone, and he can even allow the blades to enter if he needs to. But if he makes a mistake, he will end up injuring himself badly in the process, so it's a pretty risky maneuver. Now, in my previous top 10 Bankai video, this one actually took the number 1 spot. However, after comparing it to other Bankai while making this new list, I found that it just doesn't quite stand as high as I originally thought it did. But with that being said, this Bankai is still one of the best, and it should not be taken lightly, just because it is number 5. I just simply cannot place it any higher because the Bankai above this one are just too good compared to this one. What I mainly like about Byakuya's Bankai is the general concept. See, the whole idea of thousands upon thousands of small blades flying through the air at the enemy is just the coolest thing to me. and unless your opponent is fast enough to counteract these blades, you are pretty much gone. But it doesn't even stop there. He can use Senkai to take away the numbers and replace them with more concentrated and powerful blades, which he can still use to attack his opponent all at once if he pleases. And if he does, well, there's no escape because these blades already serve as a way to trap his enemy. The other benefit of using Senkai is that it takes away Byakuya's hurtless zone altogether, so when he uses it, his previous weakness is no more. And if none of that is reason enough to say this Bankai can easily compete with all the previous on this list, Byakuya can turn all these blades into one extremely powerful sword, equipped with fucking wings! So you better watch out, Toshiro. But this blade is so powerful, it is basically guaranteed to damage the enemy with multiple injuries from just one attack. It's one of the most versatile Bankai out there. To me, this Bankai is one of the most unique because none of the other Bankai are even relatively similar in any way. It's useful for multiple different scenarios and it has many different abilities that can be useful depending on the situation. And unlike most other Bankai, it can counteract its own weakness by simply using a different ability, which is amazing. Unfortunately, while this Bankai is very useful and powerful, there are just other Bankai that take it to the next level, and because of that, Byakuya scatters in at number 5. Number 4. Gin's Bankai. Kamishini no Yari. Gin's Bankai abilities are essentially the same as his shikais, where his blade extends to great lengths at a very fast speed, but its force, cutting power, length, and speed are drastically amplified to the point where Gin is capable of swiftly cutting an entire town in half with a single slash while standing a great distance away. Gin has stated that his sword can extend itself up to 13 kilometers or 8.1 miles at 500 times the speed of sound, which is exactly 171,500 meters per second in order to arrive at its full length in under 0.08 seconds, which in turn makes this the longest and fastest Zanpakuto in the entire series. The blade can also retract to its normal size at the same speed, although this actually is not Gin's true Bankai ability, and he has also stated that his Bankai is not as fast or long as he originally said. Instead, his true Bankai ability is its ability to turn into dust for just a second when it expands and contracts. See, there is a deadly poison inside the blade that dissolves and breaks down cells, so when the dust hits the enemy, it has already taken effect. However, Gin can control when this cellular breakdown occurs. See, he can leave a small sliver of his Zanpakuto in his victim, allowing him to kill his opponent whenever he chooses to. And when he does choose to, it causes the target to completely break down and dissolve at the cellular level from the inside out. Also, this Bankai does not have any particular weaknesses. So the first thing I want to discuss is his original Bankai ability. It may not be as fast or as long as he originally stated, but I still believe that it is at least a similar fraction of what he said it could do. Either way, a Bankai that can travel and contort that fast is just astronomically powerful. He can literally cut an entire town in half in less than a second. We wouldn't even have time to blink before you are cut in half, and you probably wouldn't even realize what happened until a few seconds later. And because of the speed and length alone, I believe this is one of the most deadly Bankais of them all, and I honestly cannot see very many people being able to put up a fight against it or counteract it in any way. But that's not the only thing that makes this Bankai one of the best. No, in fact there is more. His true Bankai ability is almost completely unrelated to his first one, but that just makes it that much more unique, useful, and deadly. See, when his sword expands and contracts, it actually turns into dust in that instant, and in that dust is an extremely deadly poison that will enter your body without your knowledge. And Gin can do one of two things. He can either choose to activate the poison right then and there, or retreat and kill you whenever he feels like it later. But when he does activate it, either way, it's all over. There is absolutely nothing you can do except watch yourself break down and dissolve before your very eyes. That ability alone would be enough to put Gin on this list, but the fact that he has that ability along with the fastest and longest Zanpakuto of all time is just unmatched. On top of that, he has no weaknesses, making him an even bigger force to be reckoned with. However, there is one thing that I could see being a problem, which would be an antidote. But luckily for Gin, he never told anyone about the poison, or should I say his true Bankai ability. So an antidote could have never been made. Otherwise, if say Mayuri caught wind of it, an antidote could more than likely be created, which would in turn render this ability useless. But the chances of that happening are so slim, it's almost stupid of me to consider it. So with the speed, the power, and the poison, this Bankai is one of the most useful and deadly of them all. And unless you're Sosuke motherfucking Aizen, there is no way you are coming out alive when Gin chooses to take you down. And because of that, this Bankai dissolves in at number 4. Number 3. Kisuke's Bankai. Kanen Baraki, Benihime, Aratame. This Bankai has the ability to completely restructure anything it touches for both offensive and supportive purposes. It can split open whatever is within its area of effect as if cutting with a knife. This splitting is similar to the act of dissecting something by cutting it open. It can then restructure something by stitching it back together. This can be used, for instance, as a form of healing, such as when Kisuke restored his eyesight using this power after being blinded. It can also restructure things such as Kisuke's arm to make his arm more powerful. Kisuke can also create a path for others to move through obstacles or barriers, and this Bankai has no specific weaknesses. To me, with a Bankai like this, the possibilities are absolutely endless. Its whole purpose is to basically change how things operate on the playing field. Say you want eyesight like the Predator, where you see in heat signatures or infrared. You just need to restructure your eyes and boom! Predator vision. If you don't want your opponent to be strong, you can restructure their strength to be extremely weak. And for instance, Kisuke restructured Grimmjow's arm to appear on the inside of Askin's body, so Grimmjow could tear his heart out of his body. So the possibilities are seemingly endless with what you could do. However, there's something that we didn't get to see that I'm curious about. So this Bankai can restructure anything that already exists. But can it say disassemble and reassemble people? What I mean by this is, could this Bankai say remove someone's legs and then replace them on the same person's arms? Or is this ability only altering what already exists as it is? If he could reconstruct people from scratch, this ability would be even more useful than it already is. But since we don't know for sure, I can't put it any higher. But this Bankai is also only as useful as the user's imagination. But luckily for Kisuke, he is one of, if not the smartest Shinigami out there. So I think he's got that covered. He can use this ability to fit his needs for almost any situation, and because of that, the strength can also be unmatched along with how useful and unique it already is. And it has no weaknesses in particular, meaning that there is almost no downsides to this horrifying Bankai. And because of all that, this Bankai opens up at number 3. Number 2. Yamamoto's Bankai. ZANKA no TACHI. This Bankai places the full power of Yamamoto's flames into the blade, creating a scorched katana. The flames within the blade burn anything it cuts out of existence, and no flames are visible as it cuts. This Bankai also has the side effect of depleting the moisture in the entire area. When his Bankai is activated, it engulfs his body in heat, which reaches a temperature upwards of 15 million degrees. Although this particular ability is not seen by anyone that Yamamoto doesn't want to see it. Because of this intense heat, it becomes impossible to even touch him while he is using his Bankai. Because the level of heat produced by this technique is so high, it would not actually appear in the form of flames. He can also call upon the corpses and ashes of the dead who were killed by his flames to come forth and fight on his behalf. They emerge from a rupture in the ground. When using the heat of his sword on their ashes, he can ruse all the people he has killed, allowing the corpses to become his limbs and attack whomever he deems as his enemy until they become dust. He can bring forth any specific corpse which he wishes as well, allowing him to inflict psychological damage upon those with connections to those he has slain in the past. This Bankai has only one weakness, and it is similar to KENPACHI's. See, because of the extremely intense heat which emanates from both Yamamoto's blade and body, he can only wield his Bankai for a short amount of time, and prolonged use of it will eventually destroy his opponent, Soul Society, and even himself. So his only weakness is his own massive amount of power. Although unlike KENPACHI, whose weakness would only affect his own body, this Bankai is so powerful that it could destroy the entirety of Soul Society with prolonged use. So I think it's without question that this is the most powerful Bankai of all time. But again, this list is not all about power, it's also a mixture of the overall abilities and the usefulness of the Bankai overall. So this Bankai could not be on this list based on its power overall. But it also has some pretty useful abilities along with the power. So right off the bat, let's look at the main ability of this Bankai, which is that the blade burns anything it touches out of existence. That's it. If you touch it, you no longer exist. You are just gone. Because of that, there is no way to be offensive against this sword. If you are up against this Bankai, you will pretty much always be on the defensive side. In fact, you would just be running away from the sword the whole time because you simply can't defend against it. Because if you do, let's say you put up your Zanpakuto to defend against his, and his sword hits it, RIP your Zanpakuto, it no longer exists. So because of that, there are so few ways around this Bankai. And if that's not enough, let's look at how hot this Bankai actually is. So 15 million fucking degrees. To put that in perspective, the sun is 27 million degrees Fahrenheit, or 15 million degrees Celsius. So I'm guessing it's supposed to be Celsius, which means Yamamoto is literally as hot as the fucking sun. Which, to put that into perspective, titanium melts at 1668 degrees Celsius. So if you get too close to Yamamoto, your face will literally melt in an instant. So because of how hot Yamamoto is, it is impossible to touch him whatsoever, so you simply cannot go near him or even try to use a counterattack. He is essentially invincible. But it just simply doesn't end there. If all of that just isn't enough, Yamamoto can literally resurrect anyone he has killed to form a zombie skeleton Ashes army to fight for him. But this army will continue to fight until his opponent turns to dust. However, this Bankai does have one weakness, which is itself. This Bankai is so powerful that prolonged use would literally destroy Soul Society. But honestly, I think this can be overlooked because as powerful as this Bankai is, he wouldn't need to use it for more than a few seconds to destroy his opponent. So because of all that, I feel like this Bankai is not only the most powerful, but it can literally remove anything or anyone from existence with a single slash. But on top of that, it is also the ultimate shield because nobody can attack you. And even on top of that, it cancels out Bankai such as Toshiro's because it removes the moisture from the air, making it automatically superior to them. And if none of that is enough, it also has the ability to resurrect an undead army that will stop at nothing to turn its enemies to ash, to join them for next time. Because of all that, Yamamoto burns in at number 2. But you must be wondering, if this Bankai is number 2, well, what could possibly be number 1? And the moment that you've all been waiting for... Number 1. Ichibi's Bankai. Shirafude Ichimonji. This Bankai can give and change the name of its targets who have been struck by this ink by writing kanji on their body. Doing so gives his target the properties and powers of the name he grants. For example, by changing their name to Black Ant, his opponent would be as weak and powerless as an ant. This Bankai does not have any specific weaknesses, so the description is pretty short. So I think this one is pretty self-explanatory, but to reiterate, with this Bankai you can literally change someone's name, which will in turn give them the abilities and powers of the name given. So if I were to give you the name Potato, you would have the same powers and abilities as a potato, which is basically none, which in turn leaves Ichibei able to effortlessly dispose of them as he sees fit. The one thing I don't like about this Bankai is how it really only has one ability, while other Bankai have multiple. Although I suppose this Bankai could have more, but we never got to see them. But although it only has one ability, this Bankai can defeat anyone. It could even defeat Yamamoto by renaming him Broccoli and taking away all his power, in turn making all the power he once had non-existent. And this could be used on anyone. And because of that, Ichibei's Bankai is just simply the best of them all. No one can go up against it. And theoretically, you could name a water bottle Tactical Nuke and just destroy the world. Like, the The possibilities are once again endless, and Ichigo can do as he pleases. And because of that, this Bankai is the best of them all. But there you have it, everybody, the top 10 Bankai in Bleach. Hopefully you guys can understand where I'm coming from with most of these, and hopefully you agree. If you don't, make sure to comment down below which Bankais you would put where and why, because I'm interested in what you guys have to say. On top of that, I hope this list was much better than my previous top 10 Bankai list. Personally, I think this one beats it by a mile, but I could be wrong. But anyways guys, if you enjoyed the video today, make sure to leave a like. But that's not all. If you leave a like on this video, you see, when this video hits 4,000 likes, I will be making the top 10 shikai in Bleach video. So if that interests you even in the slightest, you should definitely leave a like on this video, because once again, as soon as we hit 4,000, I will put the video on my to-do list. Also, don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already. We've got plenty more Bleach content on the way, along with plenty more top 10s in general. And there's just so much more content for you guys to see. Also, it just blows my mind that the last time I made a top 10 Bankai video, we only had 250 subscribers. It just shows you how far we've come in such a short time. And I couldn't do it without each and every one of you, so thank you.
Also, don't forget to like and follow Too Spooky on his social media and Twitch. The links are in the description. Also, feel free to send him something. His P.O. Box address is also down there.
Thanks, Bane. But if you guys cannot get enough Too Spooky content, well, why don't you click here for the top 10 Logia Devil fruits in One Piece. And if that's not doing it for you, well, why don't you click here for 10 facts about Ichigo Kurosaki. But all in all, guys, thank you all so much for watching this video today, and I seriously hope you enjoyed. But I will see you guys next time.